So I'm going to talk a little bit about, and this somebody told me today that I really lose for this big academic title, but I promise I'm going to try to define all these things. The core idea here is infrastructuring that I want to talk about. And I'll say more about this in a bit, but I've been struggling with how to explain to people over the past several years why is design, or what does design look differently in the context of design-based research when we're designing for or at scale. Sometimes we're designing for scale with very small numbers, but we're still thinking about where this is going to head. And sometimes we're designing literally in scale, so we're starting at the level of the system and creating systems change. There are seats if you aren't worried about sitting too close to the speaker up here. So I promise I don't bite, but I do move around. So I've been struggling over time to just figure out how do I explain and describe the differences between design for just one or two classrooms where the whole purpose is knowledge creation, theory development, and then the design where we actually want something to be a useful leverage point for changing systems and transforming systems. So that's kind of the focus here. And I landed on this word infrastructuring that borrows from some different traditions that I'll also talk about. And it starts with the person who really gave us, that's not going to work. It's a dead battery. That's okay. The paper that went around, and I will start today with a figure that you probably, some of you who've been in academia for a little bit of time, you use one of these ideas from her all the time. It's called the idea of a boundary object. And that's Lee Starr. Lee Starr was an anthropologist who studied the use of technology. She comes out of a tradition in learning sciences that is grounded mostly in West Coast traditions, grounded in Xerox PARC in Berkeley and a place called the Institute for Research and Learning. And there were a number of people who come out of design in this workplace ethnography, and Lee was one of them. So Lee was studying this community of biologists studying a nematode, and they were doing early gene sequencing with mid-1990s technology, which today would, all this stuff is really easy now, but it was really hard then. And she called all these scientists. She was tasked with studying this project. I think she's probably like an NSF evaluation person on the project, and tasked with saying, let's find out how people are using that. She called them up and said, oh man, I love this system, it's great. Everybody's calling, okay, can I come and visit you in your lab? So she calls multiple people up. She goes and visits people individually. She flies across all parts of the country from wherever she is. And when we get there, she's like, well, let me see where the software is. I don't know where it is. Oh, I love that. I love the interface, but I don't really use this thing. And what she said is basically nobody had figured out how to develop a reliable working infrastructure out of this. How do they make this an infrastructure for their work? And by that, I think she means the tool fading into the background, which we also have a notion of a ubiquitous computing. Ubiquitous computing, by the way, isn't about computers being everywhere as much as it is becoming invisible. So when something is a working infrastructure, it fades into the background. Now, the problem with most learning sciences innovations is they never get to this point. They become foreground, and they only survive when we provide the infrastructure, when we are there with them to actually run the software, to run the innovation, or co-teach, guide, and structure, and support with all of our grant money. That's like allowing humans to be in the class and creating hothouse conditions. So this idea of an infrastructure, I think, is really important, and that's infrastructure, the noun. But infrastructure, she points out, is always a when and a how. Some things become infrastructure at different, they become infrastructure when they fade into the background. The verb infrastructuring becomes how do we actually support creating these kinds of working infrastructures, creating the conditions that support educators, give them agency in actually making innovations into working infrastructures for organizing learning activities. So that's a verb that actually has been made. I'm not the inventor of that, but the field of human-computer interaction and also participatory design, I'll tell you a little bit more about that, have come to this as a powerful term for talking about what the goal of design is or could be. So I think of it as in two ways. It's a way to help me describe what's different about DBIR, Design-Based Implementation Research. For prospective students in the room who probably don't know what either design-based research are necessarily or implementation research, this is a blend of two different traditions. So learning science is one of its, we might call it signature methodologies, is an approach to designing and testing things in the field. Instead of creating a lab-based intervention and then translating it into the classroom, we test things in the crucible of classrooms. We collaboratively design with educators things that are ready to go in the classroom, usually with 1 or 2 classrooms at first, right? Implementation research, by contrast, is the study of policies and programs, often at scale, and the conditions under which they might succeed or fail. Now, DBIR is a blend of these. So DBIR says we're focused on not just designing for 1 or 2 classrooms, but for many. And the push is to have design-based researchers think about what it means to do that kind of design. That's what infrastructuring is. But the push on implementation research is most implementation studies are what I call post-mortems on the failures of educational policies. So the idea of DBIR is we want to learn how to make programs and policies work, right? So we say, but we're going to use the theories and the ideas from implementation research, which are organizational change theories, social capital theories, all sorts of other kinds of theories that learning scientists are not used to working with, to help us do this work. So that's what DBIR is. But what are we designing? So this talk essentially is what are we designing when we're doing this? What do we need to design? Because it isn't just curricula. That's not going to be enough. We're going to have to design a whole bunch of other stuff. So layers of theory that help organize infrastructure. I mentioned this. So Pelle Ahn has been around for decades. He is one of the founders of participatory design tradition in Scandinavia, which is one of the key influences on my own work, which is the study of, and it's grounded, the reason we do participatory design in the Scandinavian tradition, the grounding of that is in workplace democracy. So that speaks to the values that, for me, underlie why I do participatory design. This is a tradition that says if you're going to introduce new tools into the workplace, the people who are expected to use it should have some say in what those tools look like, how they're used, and whether they actually ultimately support their work. The more recent work is Dave said, look, we're going to actually do much more community-oriented work. So where this field has gone, and this book, Making Futures, is a great introduction, is to thinking about innovation in the community and how to support marginalized communities in Scandinavia to do innovation work. And they use this word infrastructuring in that connection to talk about the goals of the design. Just up the road at Northwestern, my colleague Jim Spillane and Megan Hopkins, who used to be here, I believe, for a bit, but then was, and now is at the UC San Diego. This is now the implementation research theory side that this work that I'm doing is trying to build on. So I'm really trying to, theirs is a descriptive theory of what happens with infrastructure. How does infrastructure matter for mathematics teaching in their case? They're just saying, like, to what different infrastructures, educational infrastructures, do teachers orient in their teaching? By that, I mean things like the assessments, the professional development they get, so focus on standards. So I'm now taking that and saying, how can I develop this theory by doing something with it to try to redesign? So I'm now being an interventionist to try to develop this theory, and that's the project that I'm partly on. Now there is a descriptive path. This is a slide picture of the Pompidou Center in France. I borrowed this from Jim Spillane's slide deck. Where he talks about infrastructure. One of the things about infrastructure is, remember I said it's invisible? So you have to do something what Starr and Bowker call inversion. And it is, you kind of look for the places where there are breakdowns or residual categories, people or things or events that fall outside in order to make infrastructure visible. So a case example that Bowker and Starr look at, for example, are medical diagnoses and when new ones get created. So like, well, how does that happen? And then how do then infrastructures get built around medical diagnoses, medicines, practices, entire practices. So infrastructures are deeply consequential for people's lives. Another example were racial categories in apartheid South Africa that they look at. Right? So, and what these become hugely consequential, and also a notion of these like this are infrastructures are layered. School systems, all systems, they don't get rid of the old stuff. They just layer things on top. And so when we're talking about infrastructure and inversion, we can see, hopefully when there's breakdowns, we start to see where there are breakdowns. We start to see the infrastructure itself by doing this descriptive work. So that's one technique. That's I call it the observational path. You can learn about infrastructure that way. But ours is a design path. So, and it's kind of simple, which is if I really, drawing on Kurt Levine, if you want to understand something, you've got to try to change it. And so this technique is you want to sort of change a core component in a complex system, and you want it to align. This is very central for me in terms of theory. Is what all of my work is always oriented around is a particular vision for teaching and learning that I want to figure out how to support. The work that I'm going to describe now is based on the framework for K-12 science education. So we change a component, that could be curriculum, for example. We observe the resistances that arise when we try to implement that, and then we work to redesign those sources of resistance in the infrastructure. Because what happens is those resistances often show us what the infrastructure is, what components actually matter. And components can be static things or they can be processes. They can be artifacts or processes. So, for example, processes by which teachers are evaluated. That involves a set of artifacts, but it's also like, okay, I'm going in and observing and I'm giving you feedback. So that whole routine is an example of infrastructure. So what does this look like? I often give the image of working in research practice partnerships of this as team rafting in rapids. So what are the rapids? They're changing educational environments. The team are all of the members of the partnership. They could be educators, researchers, community members, young people, parents, so forth. And we're trying to figure out how to navigate and steer this down these rapids in some direction. But some infrastructuring is like when the rafts go up on dry dock a little bit, where we sort of try to get out of the water for a little bit. And as a partnership, do some work on the things that are helping us get down the river in the ways that we want, and safely and so forth. So I think you can think of the infrastructuring work as happening, it's about the things in the river, but it's also needing to happen a little bit outside of the main work. So the work I'm going to describe is the work of what we call it's called the Inquiry Hub Partnership. The two longest standing partners, this is an 11-year-old partnership between CU Boulder and Denver Public Schools. And there are other partners, though, that are deeply involved with this for specific lines of work. Northwestern University for the curriculum work that we're doing in Next Gen Science Standards. For our scale work, we're working with a group called the Next Gen Exemplar System, which provides professional development related to building inclusive cultures of figuring out together. BSCS, which is a curriculum organization based in Colorado Springs. Utah State helps us with evaluation work, and Project Voice is a youth participatory action research group in North Denver that we're working with to really push our own boundaries around youth involvement in design. So that's just to say that there's a lot of people. Our core design activity, so there's a leading activity here that the infrastructuring is designed to support, is that we've been designing NGSS-aligned curriculum in high school biology. And this came out of an NSF grant, and we found ourselves slowly and almost accidentally developing a full year of course. The first grant was only to develop a unit, had another grant to develop a second unit, and then the district said, this is worthless to us unless we get a full year of curriculum. So they actually paid for a third unit, so this 3-unit curriculum. And this is all collaboratively designed with Denver teachers, Denver district folks, researchers both at CU, Northwestern, a couple of Illinois teachers too who are involved in some of this. And we just won a NGSS design badge for this one, so we're very proud of that. That means an external review for the quality of alignment, and I think we're one of 3 that have gotten that so far. So this shows you that co-design can produce very high quality products you know, it doesn't just require curriculum experts to do that. We can get there with this collaborative approach. That is a core activity, but if we want teachers to implement this, when we started, until this year, we didn't actually have the NGSS in Colorado. The district was all about going forward, but guess what? Everything is out of alignment. The standards themselves, the assessments, everything. And so teachers are trying to implement these new curricula, so we faced resistances right away, as you might well imagine. So the shift, though, that we're trying to do, this is back to the vision for a moment. The curriculum is important, but it's in the service of this vision, which is we want to create an inclusive culture of figuring out core ideas together, in which the flow of activities is coherent from the student point of view. So the problem with most science curricula, maybe most curricula at all, is we design them to be coherent from my point of view, the expert knowledge point of view. So I think you ought to learn about photosynthesis, so now I'm going to teach you about photosynthesis. So from the kid point of view, I don't know why I need to learn about photosynthesis. And we don't worry about that, because we want them to become disciplinary experts, and this is what disciplinary experts know. We don't think about the possibility that a more interesting thing might be, how can a tree help with solving the problem of climate change? How could planting a bunch of trees help with that? Oh, you know, it turns out you need to learn something about photosynthesis to get at how carbon gets taken out of the air and stored in wood for a long time, right? So suddenly I've changed the coherence standpoint, and but I'm not teaching photosynthesis because now we need to know that, but because we come to a certain place in our unit and are trying to solve this problem or explain this phenomenon where we need this disciplinary core idea related to how plants make food and energy from the air, you know. So we also want to have students' interests and questions drive the learning, because from our standpoint, 3D learning really should be 5D learning, which is that we need to think of interest and identity as core dimensions of the learning process. So if we don't captivate and sustain student interest, that's a really problem if you've got these long 8-week problem-based units and kids are bored out of their minds because you've chosen a phenomenon that they're not interested in. So from our standpoint, you've got to have an evidentiary warrant for that, and we have some ways to do that. It's not the focus of today, but you can ask me about it. And where the outcome is that we foster a sense of belonging and contribution to the class that can't be predicted by knowing a student's race, gender identity, or home language. That's our core equity goal that we hold ourselves, and we have measures of that that we monitor. So our approach, following Brian Reiser's work, is to build what we call a storyline. And me coming out of more of a design tradition, I was like, oh, this is like what in HCI would be a scenario-based design. One of the things that we do is we think about, where do we start this thing? So this is the start of our evolution unit, which no one can read this. I'm not expecting you to. I just want to, I'll kind of point out what's in these things. We teach about adaptation, natural selection through antibiotic resistance. And the kids watch in the very first, this frontline video of this kid, Addie, who has MRSA. And they're like, and then we build a driving question board about, like, what's going on with Addie? What do we need to explain why is she not getting better with these antibiotics that she's getting? Why is she getting sicker and sicker? So what we do is write the experience of the lesson from the student point of view before we ever write a single lesson. You will not see in the fourth column, this says what we figure out. You'll never see a teacher move in here. This is all from the student perspective. So we try to design for coherence for the student perspective by centering the generic student, who's part of a collective enterprise to try to figure out stuff together, right? So that's one of our things. Then each of these also has a lesson level, 3-dimensional performance expectation, so we know where we're headed here. Some investigative phenomenon or presentation of video, and a lesson level question that drives this. So before we write a single lesson, we build out this whole storyline so that we know that it's going to coherently build lesson from lesson, where every time we figure some stuff out, but we also have some new questions at the end that then feed into the next lesson. And this is a tool that we use that scaffolds the co-design process. Without this and along with a whole bunch of other tools and routines, we couldn't produce high-quality materials. This is essential to getting to co-design. Co-design is not this completely unfacilitated process. It is deeply and highly structured to get to quality. So it's participation, but it's structured. So when we started going out in the class, I told you already about misalignments. We had a few things. So one, and this is an enduring thing for all NGSS work, is pacing, and sequencing of units. So one, we got the pacing all wrong. Everything that we said take 10 minutes, take 30, and a lesson that is supposed to take 50 minutes took 3 hours. And there's some teachers teaching this ecosystems unit that was out of the gate. We thought it was 8 weeks. It's like 20 for them. So, and part of it too is us, but part of it is also I'm used to telling kids stuff that goes really fast, right? I can get a lot of ideas out, but I'm just covering it. They're not learning it necessarily. So some of it is also like you got to interpret the resistances. Another one was the principal observation protocols. They were way off. Kids were saying, well, this isn't rigorous, or this isn't what we should be seeing. You should be using a variety of curriculum materials, not the single coherent curriculum. That's like the rubric says I'm supposed to use a variety of materials. And the paper deals with the infrastructuring effort here. In the talk today, I wanted to share a little bit about the assessment work, because those were what were way off, and they were at many different levels. So the participatory design folks in Scandinavia have this notion of infrastructuring as patchwork effort. So you have this core design thing you're doing, but you have to start devoting attention to patchwork efforts. Oh, sorry. Before I get there, here are the 3 different kinds of things where the resistances showed up in assessment. One is there were a set of district unit tests. They were low stakes. They were not consequential, but the teachers were required to administer them. And they were all one-dimensional tests written by teachers with no background in the next-gen science standards. Because why would they have them? Because the district hadn't adopted them. The second were the absence of anything that was recognizable as an assessment to the teachers and the materials themselves. Right? We're like, there's lots of assessment opportunities here. Like, not what I'm used to seeing. And then third, needing to have a way to grade student work. So, and Jim and I have written about this with Lori Shepard, like, you have to help teachers solve the grading problem, period. There's just no way to take our researchy based assessment and live within the lived reality. I hate grading, it's bad, but it is a reality that our teachers faced, So, I mean, if we could not grade, that would be a great infrastructural change to make in school districts, and some districts are inventing new ways around that. So our patchwork effort that we did first was to tackle the unit assessment. And it happened a little bit by accident, but it happened because we were in partnership. The accident only happened because we have this kind of continuous stream of communication with the district. So we're on the 4th or 5th day of the first unit lesson there, unit writing, and somebody says, oh, the new district assessment tests are due in 3 days. Here's a bunch, can I see them? So I looked at it, I was like, uh-oh, we're in trouble. We just designed a unit that's not aligned to that. I went home. I wrote 3 tasks myself. So I was like, all right, will you consider these? Is it only if we get to take it through the same review process as everything else? So I was like, all right, that's fine. So made it through the review. I got a little bit of feedback on rubrics, got the rubrics so they fit within their requirements. And then what was cool about it is they wound up there, and we also got comparison group data for free. I work with a school district, and I've got I-Hub kids and non-I-Hub kids. There are no results because our curriculum is still stank. Plus my assessments stank because I wrote them overnight. So, but this is like the step 1, right? So we realize, and suddenly we realize, oh, this is a process we need to insert ourselves into if we have any hope of surviving. Because these teachers, we were already hearing, they orient to these. What they do, what they say on those tests matters to them. So year 2, they don't do this at the same exact time every year. We missed the process. We missed it. So we just didn't do it. Year 3, we started to really think more about how can we continue to develop more tasks, and we shared these tasks more with teachers to use in their classrooms. And at this time too, there had been a policy change, so there was no worry about test security. So we could design things that fit into the curriculum and the unit test at the same time, so that we were signaling stuff to even non-I-Hub teachers about what is important to be assessing and the kinds of tasks that you can work on. And then we shared them back with teachers to use, and they were really grateful because for the first time they saw some things in the curriculum materials that looked like assessments to them. And you know, the product for us was we still had this sort of iHub and non-iHub classrooms that we could see. And then we realized we need to make the patchwork effort more central and get some funding for it. So we wrote a grant to fund work on a 3D assessment. It was not funded. It was to Big DRK-12. It went to a panel of psychometricians. Jim and I talked about this, and it's like, no, this is not what this project is. I need something that really helps build capacity. And this is a capacity building effort to build teachers and a district's ability to have 3D assessment in their systems. I'm not trying to create valid, reliable assessments at this point. I'm trying to do something more foundational, which is, we'll get there, but you're not going to get there this way. We were able to get funded as an eager grant, which we've been able to continue work, and I was sharing some of that work this morning that's funded on that grant. And the other thing that we started to do a lot in our, so the district has PD days, and one of the great things, I can't talk about it, one of the core infrastructures of every district is the district provided professional development days. That is an infrastructure that we get to own, so to speak, meaning for our teachers, in that they automatically come to the district PD. They come to iHub stuff for a PD. They don't go to other stuff, and that's just as we have created a little community of iHub teachers. And so for those field days, we focus a lot on, and when we introduce the units, we also we focus on what we call consensus models of the anchoring phenomena. So we actually leap forward and say, okay, here's the assessment that's very embedded, that's explaining why Addie got sick and why there are more Addies today, using their understanding of natural selection and adaptation. And so we're not sure kind of yet where we are with, you know, how that is useful, but we also have started, we talk about, again, Jim and I have written a little bit about this with Lori Shepard, how this fits into an emerging system of assessments. I think I have a drawing up here in a bit about that. So, but we didn't, I think, the question mark is there is because we didn't study all this. One thing that's, the reality is you can't study all the stuff you do in this work. So we have to pick, and we have to get resources. If we want to study something, we need a grant, really, is sort of what we've discovered. There's a lot of stuff we can do and tweak in infrastructuring work, but we can't always study it all. So now we've been doing much more work around transfer tasks. So by transfer here we mean trying to assess the same performance expectations on a novel phenomenon. You can see one of them. It was just released this week on the Achieve website. It's called the Evolution of Swallows. It goes with our evolution unit. So, and we also produce this activity I'll talk about. We call it a sticky activity that helps teachers see how ideas in the curriculum are going to build lesson to lesson. They basically reconstruct that storyline piece by looking at lessons, investigating them. So we work with the consensus phenomena. So here's your culminating assessment. Maybe together we should go back and see how the lessons build toward that and are going to help your kids do well on this assessment. So we have this activity that we do with them to say, okay, you're in charge of 2 lessons that are contiguous. Say what kids do in that lesson, and you get sticky notes for that, and what kids figure out and what they're likely to have questions about at the end of it. And then we look at the flow. And this is another way that we sort of help them understand how ideas are building over time that recenter the focus on this idea of coherence as a design principle as opposed to the test, right? But we're really thinking about assessment in that moment. And we use a lot of our own scoring guides in a research study to look at these transfer tasks and how they're performing. So now, moment to be an academic, we've been submitted to Science Ed an article that looks at task comparability, which is a huge issue, and we didn't nail it at all. So, I mean, it's a sobering story of like, it's hard to create equivalent tasks in terms of difficulty for these phenomenon-based tasks. I probably could have used a little bit more of the NGSA process to make our tasks better in terms of having a fair shot. But we did show some gains. So overall, we were showing that these assessments, depending on which assessments we used, we could show the effect of our curriculum in a pre-post design. And then with the sticky activity, one of the things that was really powerful is that we've learned in doing this is teachers begin to trust the flow of a storyline and that they can really partner with their kids on the direction instead of just, I've got to teach this now. So that's been a sort of really powerful thing. So I want to interlude to talk about what travels. So I mentioned that this is sitting on the Achieve website. So part of a process that Jim was part of too this summer of reviewing tasks. We submitted all of the tasks that are embedded in our curriculum because we realized the field needs this too. They need example tasks. To submit all of those to be reviewed by peer reviewed and get annotated. And we're excited because we get feedback on these things, and it was awesome. All right, so, but now, like, that is something that travels and is not just limited to the benefits of our partnership. The other thing that travels across different settings is the sticky activity. So one of our teachers who just texted me right before I came in here to show me this cool participatory sim she just did with her kids on CRISPR came up with this idea originally of when we were redesigning one of our units in the summer. It's like, maybe we just need to put this up and like put it up and try to, we don't know, the flow is all off. We need to redesign it. So this is the question, this is what we figure out, and the question, and I think where we're going next, so roughly. This picture is not from that day. This is up in Brian Reiser's office like about a year after that. I was like, oh, look at that, that traveled. This is one of our professional development days last fall. This is at Open Syed Middle School PD 2 weeks ago. I don't have anything to do with these other things, right? So, well, I have something to do with this, but I'm not leading that. I took the picture. So, like, the moment to say, I just want to pause and say, what is it that travels in this work? It's not what you expect. It's not the curriculum is traveling. But, like, this is an important thing to travel because it's actually a mechanism to support teacher learning of how to teach in this way that's more coherent from the student point of view, where a teacher can begin to trust that, yeah, kids' questions really can drive instruction, even with a structured curriculum. Right? That's a big shift to try to get teachers to make, and I think it's why it travels, because everyone observes the same, similar, like, oh, this is helpful. Seems small, right? But it turns out it's one of those leverage points, and I could never have predicted this. Never predicted that. So the second one that we did was expanding on some of the embedded activities. I mentioned we focused a lot on these, whoops, this is sort of going wrong direction. Oh no, this is right. Okay, so I've talked a little bit about this piece, and I've talked a little bit about this. But I want to talk about what we've been doing too, and I think you got a paper related to some of this work. The other piece is, as we try to think harder about the interest and identity pieces, not just up front in selecting phenomena, as we center equity of experience, how do we measure that? So what we did is start to build in these sort of hybrid electronic exit tickets. We call them seats. I predicted they would go straight to acronym, and they did. So as I designed it, they would call them a seat. And so that people say, what's a seat? Is it the student electronic exit ticket? It doesn't look like any exit ticket that you'll actually ever see in most classrooms, which are these short little knowledge assessments. Our exit assessment asks kids things like, I figured out something on the driving question board today, or I know where we need to go next tomorrow. I contributed ideas and shared ideas in a small group or with the class. When I shared my ideas, they influenced the class direction. When other people shared, I learned from that. And then there are some multiple choice questions that we add that are related to the content of the lesson. And we've really been trying to work on how do we make these really central, not just as data collection moments for us and for the partnership, but how to help formative uses of these analysis of student experience. So we're going to be starting some work with professional learning communities of teachers and building some visualizations to make this more accessible. In terms of infrastructure, we baked these into the district assessment system. So so it turns out Google Forms is not a great tool for this, where we've been collecting these data, even though we thought it would be fine. They work in the Google Classroom. But with Illuminate, they could actually look very quickly without any programming on our part at the results. The only trick is the infrastructure. This is one of those cool mismatches. Requires you to enter a standard. So what's the standard when you're asking a kid about whether they contributed in class? So, you know, Douglas, our district partner, just made up a standard for that, and so bypassed the system. But it just goes to show you, like, people are not even, our assessment infrastructures are so broken because they're on a model of assessment, but it's what teachers have to use. Meaning they use all multiple choice, easily graded, you know, it's really hard to sort of integrate with that infrastructure. But we've done some kludgy work to do that. The other is we're continuing to develop through our grant, develop PD on the design of 3D assessments, and we now are using some of the district field days to look at and analyze teacher design tasks and also adapt those in development. So that's important. Here's a diagram I wanted to show that. So what we have now is an emerging balanced system of assessments centered around a vision of teaching and learning. A vision of equitable teaching and learning that centers interest and identity and the 3 dimensions, that is organized in a small niche within high school biology. So it's not district-wide, right? But we have created a little model exemplar of what a balanced system could look like that has a core curriculum, has these purple things which are student interest and identity pieces, blue things that center on practices. This is, I don't know what color that is on there, but this interest survey up front, we have some moments in the curriculum where we elicit what are related phenomena that kids might explore. Exit tickets that also get an interest and experience in what we figure out. And then 3D transfer tasks that support the curriculum. So that, I think we've been, and that's also because I think both Douglas Watkins, my partner in the central office on this work, and I really think like we're trying to keep coherence at the center. So I think of coherence and equity, these two poles that we just try to keep central. Coherence from the standpoint of whatever teachers are being told to do, the assessments need to be pointing towards this vision of science teaching and learning. So if we want to center equity, we have to have these other 2 dimensions, right? We need the data on interest and experience in order to make sure we're meeting our equity goals. And we need these 3D that are really tied to the standards themselves. So how does this help us build knowledge? Because the goal of learning sciences research is to, there are many goals of design research. One is to build theory, another is to build knowledge, and third is to build actual practical tools. So hopefully you see the tools are better. They're out there, they're in the world, there's a free curriculum, you can go get it anywhere. But then what's the knowledge product? What's the theory product? So one of the things I think we're doing is trying to develop, and by develop I mean elaborate, challenge, extend the theory of educational infrastructure that Megan Hopkins, Jim Spillane, and others have actually been articulating. So what have we added to that? They don't talk about the cyclical nature of this. And so the fact that these cycles of assessment design happen over and over again, there's a temporal dimension to infrastructure. It's regular even if it's not at the same time every year, and we missed the boat. So it's also subject to being, it's not only cyclical, but it's subject to things getting off schedule in ways that make it hard for you as a partnership to actually do infrastructuring work well or consistently. So we get better at this over time, but we never get 100%. We miss moments to have that influence. There's not just one cycle though. Like these things get changed and evolve, and policies change over different years and within the year and in relationship to things going on in the district. And the power of the partnership is that we have a better shot at finding out what those things are, especially when we have a boundary spanner on the inside who tunes in to the coherence part enough to say, uh-oh, if we don't do something about this, it's going to really mess us up right now. So that's really important. So one of the other texts I got right before the room is, okay, the teal day that got canceled because of the teacher strike is now going to happen on the same day we have for our 3D assessment PD. So we have like a cycle thing to worry about now. So that's just the temporal dimension of like, okay, something happened that was a pretty big event in Denver, and we canceled our PD, for that while they were deciding whether they'd go on strike. So I get asked the question a lot. So people used to not think that I was much of a learning scientist at all. I was a sociologist. I think Susan Giroux asked me once I came to Colorado, he's like, how come you're like a sociologist? And I was like, well, I kind of am, but I also think this is learning, right? And I think what I do is design-based research, too. So I thought I would pull out this quote from Anne Brown's 1992 paper when this is one of the foundational papers for introducing design research to the field. See, Anne Brown was thinking about this a long time ago. She also said, I'm not including this quote in here, but she said, in order for me, she was working on a couple of different kinds of things and looking at scale. And one of them was fostering a community of learners, which to my mind she predicted would never scale, and it has scaled inside San Francisco Unified School District as best I can tell. They use complex instruction and communities of learners in their math and science work at the scale of a district. But she said back then, there's no way, it's too complicated. And what I need are the skills of a sociologist and an organizational scholar in order to do this. What she said is, here's what design research is. It's like my agenda is more like a designer or engineer. I need to unconfound variables, not only for theoretical clarity, but also so that necessary and sufficient aspects of an intervention can be disseminated. The question becomes, what are the absolutely essential features that must be in place to cause change under conditions that one can reasonably hope to exist in normal school settings? Not so humbly, I want to change some of the words to reflect what I think we've learned. So, because I build on that, so I say not so humbly because I realize that it's a little arrogant to do that. I don't think we're talking about my agenda anymore. With this work, we're always talking about a we, whose agenda this is. We're also not talking about designers and engineer, and I have other papers around this that I think our metaphor for learning should be about organizing social futures. And I think we want all the entailments of the word organizing. Organizing in the sense of the active work of creating organizing in the sense of activism, of changing systems to empower those who are marginalized within systems. So I think we need to shift from designer to organizer in this. I don't think the game is unconfounding variables anymore. Sorry to the psychologists in the room who love to do that. There is value in that. I don't want to devalue it, but I think this work in design research is to develop and study processes primarily, not only for theoretical clarity, but that so we can understand how interventions need to be adapted to different kinds of contexts. The game is not dissemination. I'd love it if we stopped using the word dissemination altogether, because we're not going away in a partnership. So the point is not for us to leave our seeds somewhere and then go away, right? Well, think about the root of the word. We're going to hang around and we're going to try to understand how we do adaptation, because nothing gets there's nothing that stays still. Our curricula is in Google Docs that people can copy and adapt, and that's on purpose because we design for adaptation. And when you think about that as the game instead of designing for fidelity, you're gonna shift what you prepare teachers to do. You're gonna say, I'm not just gonna provide them all these 3D assessments because they're gonna go and write their own assessments anyway. We better prepare them to do that well, right? If they're gonna do it on their own, let's give them the right tools to do it well. And that's what we focus on instead of providing them with all these finished products. So we provide a lot of half-finished or finished and adaptable products, or tools to develop their own. And then I think part of it is infrastructuring says normal school settings are likely to kill our powerful new interventions if we don't try to change them. So we want to actually try, and also school, I want to cross out the school thing because we're talking about learning across different settings. We're talking about the adults who are not just learning in their classroom but also in professional development settings. We're talking about kids in youth organizations who are helping us to design stuff that's more relevant to the concerns of their communities. And we're talking about people who move across these settings and how do we support cross-setting learning. Learning is a cross-setting phenomenon. So if we design for that, we have to think about that even when we're centering our work in schools. And we want to cultivate these settings. We're not just going to accept them as they are. That's the activist orientation, but it's also the infrastructuring part. Is that we're actually trying to create good conditions for powerful new innovations that have the potential to transform learning for everybody, creating those conditions in the settings where they work. And that is where I think we ought to be headed, and that's where I'm going to close with this and leave time for questions with links to conventions.
Okay.